The egg cracked at the wrong moment. It had been sitting in the center of the grand nesting hall for 11 days, wrapped in warm stone and the careful attention of every elder on Varath. The ceremony was supposed to be clean, organized. A silver dragon hatchling bonding with a noble of House Dravener. That was how the records were meant to read. That was how it had always gone. But the egg cracked while the guards were still being positioned. Rin Salvar noticed it first because he was standing closest to the rear pillar, and the sound moved through the stone floor before it moved through the air. A low tick, like a knuckle pressed against old wood. He shifted his weight and looked toward the nest platform without thinking. That was all, just a look. The ceremony began properly enough. 12 young Veritai stood in a line before the nest's sons and daughters of noble families, dressed in ceremonial silver and deep blue. Their posture was perfect. Their hands were still. They had trained for this day since they were children, studying dragon temperament, bond rituals, the correct breathing patterns to signal calm submission to a hatchling. Lord Iden Dravener stood at the head of the hall, tall and silver-haired, wearing his house crest on a chest plate that caught every bit of light in the room. He had been smiling since dawn. His youngest nephew was third in the line. The expectation in the room was nearly a physical thing, warm and certain, like the heat from the nest stones. Elder Marin stood off to the side, quiet as she always was, watching the egg with the particular stillness of someone who had seen many ceremonies and was not yet sure this one would go as planned. The shell split fully at the 9th hour. The hatchling came out small and loud, shaking silver scales still wet from the shell, making a sound somewhere between a bird cry and a low engine hum. The crowd held its breath. The 12 noble candidates straightened their backs. The hatchling stepped off the nest platform. It went to the first candidate, Lord Dravener's nephew, and sniffed at his hands for a long moment. Then it stepped back. The boy's smile flickered but held. The hatchling moved to the second candidate, sniffed, stepped back. Then the third, the fourth. By the 6th candidate, the silence in the hall had changed quality. It was no longer warm. It had edges. The hatchling moved down the line without pausing much anymore, as if it had already found what it was not looking for and was simply confirming the absence of something else. Each noble it passed stood a little stiffer than the one before. Lord Dravener's smile did not disappear. It simply stopped being a smile and became the shape of one. At the end of the line, the hatchling stopped, looked at the 12th candidate for less than a second, then turned and walked directly away from the ceremony platform. Nobody moved. The hatchling crossed the stone floor of the grand nesting hall, past the ceremonial rope boundary, past the attending scholars, past 2 of the honor guards, and stopped in front of Rin Salvar. Rin was a human. He was not a candidate. He was not nobility. He was a soldier on a 3-month assignment to the Veritai liaison post, assigned to guard duty because he was reliable and kept his mouth shut. He had a scar on his left hand from a tunnel collapse when he was 17. He had no idea what a bonding ceremony felt like from the inside. The hatchling pressed its nose against that scarred hand and went still. The hall was completely silent except for the low hum. The hatchling was making a sound that shifted slightly in pitch at the point of contact, like something adjusting to a new frequency. Rin did not pull away. He did not reach down either. He just stood there, because the creature was calm and small and pressing against him the way tired things press against warmth, and some part of him simply did not want to disturb that. Then Lord Dravener's voice crossed the room like a stone thrown through glass. "Remove it." 2 handlers moved forward. The hatchling's hum became something else, a low sound from the back of its throat, not loud, not violent, but carrying the unmistakable message that it was not interested in being moved. Both handlers stopped without being touched. Elder Marin had not moved from her place at the side of the hall, but she was watching Rin now, not the hatchling, watching the way his breathing had stayed even, watching the way his scarred hand had turned very slightly so the hatchling's nose rested in the curve of his palm. A small adjustment, unconscious. The kind a person makes when trying not to disturb something fragile. That is a human, Lord Dravener said, addressing Elder Marin directly now, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who believes the statement alone is sufficient argument. That is a guard. Marin looked at him. Then she looked at the hatchling, which had now curled itself around Rin's left boot and closed its eyes. Yes, she said, and she has chosen him. The word chosen landed in the room the way a verdict lands, flat and final, and impossible to unhear. Rin looked down at the small silver creature wrapped around his foot and said nothing at all. Around him, 12 noble candidates stood in a line and tried to understand what had just happened to their certainty. Outside, wind moved through the stone arches of the nesting hall. Nobody had an answer yet, but something had begun. The room they put Rin in was not a cell, but it was not a guest room either. It had one narrow window that looked out onto the training yard, a low bench along one wall, and a water basin that was slightly too tall for him to use comfortably. A Verity-sized room, in other words, built for people who stood a head taller and had a different center of gravity. Rin sat on the bench and watched the hatchling explore the corners of the room with her nose, sniffing at the floor seams, tapping the stone with one small claw, circling back to him every few minutes the way a dog checks on someone it has decided to be responsible for. He had started thinking of her as Syl. He had not told anyone that. In the council chamber down the hall, he could hear voices. Not the words, just the rhythm, the kind of rhythm that meant argument, not discussion. Peaks and pauses. Someone cutting someone else off. Someone else waiting too long before responding. Lord Dravener's voice had a particular quality to it that carried through walls. Not loudness. Weight. The voice of someone who was used to rooms agreeing with him. Rin set his scarred hand flat on his knee and looked at it. He had gotten the scar when he was 17, working a summer contract in the northern tunnel systems. A support beam had failed and the ceiling had come down in sections. He had been near the exit when it started. He had gone back in because 2 of the older workers had not made it out and he could still hear one of them calling. He had gotten both of them clear. The third had already been gone by the time the first beam fell. He did not think about that part much anymore. He did not think of the scar as anything in particular. It was just the hand he had. Syl came back from the corner of the room, stepped over his boot and pressed her head against his left knee. He put his hand on her neck without thinking about it. She made a low sound, not the warning sound she had used at the ceremony, but something quieter, steadier, like a note being held. The door opened, and Elder Marin came in alone. She was the oldest Verity Rin had met on this posting, not frail, but the kind of old that had settled incompletely, where the weight of years had stopped being a burden and started being a structure. She had deep gray skin, the color of winter cloud, and eyes that were a lighter gray still, almost silver. She looked at Syl first, then at Rin. "She is still pressed against your left hand," Marin said, "not a question." "She keeps coming back to it," Rin said. Marin stepped further into the room and crouched slightly, which for a Verity elder was still eye level with a seated human. "Tell me about the scar." Rin looked at her for a moment. "It is from a collapsed tunnel. I was 17. 2 workers were trapped. I went back for them." "And you got them out?" "Both." "Were you afraid?" Rin thought about this honestly. "Yes. My hands were shaking the whole time. I kept thinking the ceiling was going to come down on me, but the other option was not going back and I could not make myself not go back, so I went." Marin was quiet for a moment. Syl had not moved. "In our bonding records," Marin said carefully, "there is a pattern we call the deep pull. It is what a hatchling feels when it meets someone whose instinct toward protection is not a decision. When helping is not something a person chooses in the moment because they weighed the options. When it is something they simply do the way a heart beats, they do not think go back. They just go." Rin said nothing. "Most Verity nobles train that instinct carefully," Marin continued. "They build it, discipline it, honor it through practice. It becomes a considered virtue, something they carry deliberately." She tilted her head slightly. You do not carry it deliberately at all, do you? Rin looked at his hand. I do not really think about it. No, Marin said, that is the point. She stood back up. Syl lifted her head briefly, watching the elder, then resettled against Rin's knee. The council will argue for another 2 hours, Marin said. Lord Dravener believes the bond is an error. Commander Sova believes it is a political inconvenience. 2 of the junior scholars believe the hatchling was disoriented from shell break and imprinted on the nearest warm body. She paused. I believe none of those things. What do you believe? Rin asked. I believe that Syl found exactly what she was looking for, Marin said, and that none of us were expecting it to be wearing a human uniform. She turned to go, then stopped in the doorway. They will give you 30 days, she said, a formal evaluation. If the bond does not prove genuine by their standards in that time, they will attempt to transfer her to a noble rider. She looked at him steadily. I am telling you this not to frighten you, but because you should know what is happening in that room. Rin looked down at Syl, who had closed her eyes and was making the steady low hum again. What do I do? He asked. Marin almost smiled. What you apparently always do, she said. Stay. The door closed behind her. Down the hall, the argument continued. Outside, the sun over Vareth was going down, painting the training yard the color of old bronze. Syl hummed against his knee. Rin stayed. On Vareth, dragons did not learn by being taught. They learned by watching. Tova had explained this on the first morning of training, standing in the open field with her arms crossed, and her expression suggesting she would rather be somewhere else. She was young for a Varetai trainer, barely past her first decade of adult service, with close-cropped dark hair and the particular accent of the eastern coastal cities. She had been assigned to oversee Rin and Syl because nobody senior wanted the responsibility of whatever this was. She will observe you, Tova said, pointing at Syl. She will mirror your body state. Your tension becomes her tension. Your calm becomes her calm. This is why bond training with nobles begins in childhood. They have years to build the correct internal patterns. And I have 30 days, Rin said. 28 now, Tova said. They began with basic groundwork. The standard exercises that Varetai riders trained with their hatchlings in the first weeks of bonding: directional movement, response cues, the posture signals that communicated intent without sound. Tova demonstrated each exercise clearly. Then she watched Rin try them. He was not bad at it. He was not good at it either. He was something else, something Tova did not have a clean word for. He was patient in a way that did not look like patience. The way a stone in a riverbed does not look like it is doing anything at all, and yet the river has been moving around it for 100 years. He made mistakes. He repeated them without frustration. He adjusted slightly each time. Syl watched him with her head cocked, and on the third repetition of the directional walk, she simply started walking beside him, matching his stride. Tova had seen bonded pairs take 2 weeks to reach that point. She did not say anything. She wrote it in her evaluation log and moved on. The 4th day brought a problem in the form of a noble trainee named Dorev, a tall young Varetai from one of the minor houses, still bitter about the ceremony, with the specific kind of pride that needed an audience to function. He had a bonded hatchling of his own, a green-scaled male 2 days older than Syl, and he had taken to running their morning drills on the opposite end of the training field where Rin could see them perfectly. On the 4th day, Dorev walked his hatchling directly across Rin's training path, close enough to be deliberate. Human, he said, not looking at Rin, talking to his own hatchling the way people talk through someone they are actually talking to. Strange to see a guard animal in the bonding field. One wonders what it is being trained to do. Rin stopped walking. He did not say anything. He did not look at Dorev either. He stood still. Syl had been beside him. She stopped the moment he stopped. She turned her head toward Dorev's hatchling, then toward Dorev. Then she stepped forward 1 step, 2 steps, and stood between Rin and the young noble with her wings folded tight and her chin low. She did not growl. She did not show teeth. She simply became a wall. Dorev's hatchling backed up 2 steps on its own. Dorev blinked, recalibrated, and walked away. Tova had seen the whole thing from the side of the field. She wrote 4 lines in her evaluation log, then crossed out 3 of them, then wrote them again differently. That evening she asked Rin about it. "You did not respond to him," she said. "Most people respond." "He wanted a reaction," Rin said. "If I gave him one, it would have kept going. If I did not, it was over." "And Syl?" Rin looked toward the stable where Syl had already settled in for the night. "She was watching me. I was calm. She stayed calm. She just wanted to make sure I was not in a corner." He paused. "She is very literal about corners." Tova looked at her evaluation log. Then she asked the question she had been circling for 4 days. "How did you know to stand still?" Rin thought about it. "In the tunnels back home, when there was a gas pocket somewhere you could not see, you did not run. Running moved the air wrong. You stood still and let your lamp tell you which way the drift was going. Then you moved slowly and deliberately. Speed was the dangerous thing." Tova stared at him. "You applied mine tunnel survival logic," she said slowly, "to a social confrontation with a noble-born Veritae." Rin considered this. "I suppose I did." Tova closed her log. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the darkening field, the last of Vareth's sun going down behind the stone walls of the nesting hall. Then she said, very quietly, so that it did not quite count as a professional statement, "She was right to pick you." Rin looked at her. "Syl," Tova said, not meeting his eyes. "She was right." She tucked the evaluation log under her arm. "Training resumes at first light. Do not be late. The next exercise involves height, and your instinct to not panic at altitude is something I have not yet measured." She walked back toward the hall. Behind her, across the training field in the warm dark of the stable, Syl made the low, steady hum that meant she was comfortable, and the person she had chosen was nearby, and everything was the way it was supposed to be. 24 days left on the clock. Rin did not feel like counting them anymore. The summons came on the 12th day, written on House Dravener official paper. Rin read it twice. The language was formal and curved in the particular way Veritae legal writing curved, every sentence moving toward its point the way a river moves toward the sea, slowly and with many unnecessary bends. The short version was this: Lord Dravener had invoked the bond purity statute, an old law that allowed any contested bonding to be verified through biological resonance scanning. If the scan returned a proximity imprint rather than true resonance, the bond was legally breakable. Tova, reading over his shoulder, said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "He has been planning this since day 1. The scanning chamber was deep inside the Hall of Records, a part of the building Rin had not seen. It smelled like old stone and something chemical, sharp and faintly sweet. The equipment filled one-wall Veritae instruments, tall and angular, designed for hands that had 4 fingers and a different reach than his. A bioscholar named Orit ran the procedure with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times and expected a routine result. Lord Dravener stood in the observation alcove. He had brought 2 of his advisors. He did not look at Rin. He looked only at the equipment. Orit explained the process in clipped, technical language. A sensor array would read the resonance pattern between the hatchling and her bonded companion. True resonance, the deep, permanent kind, produced a matched frequency signature that could not be faked. A proximity imprint was thinner, unstable at distance, with a signature that drifted rather than locked. Rin sat on the scanning platform with Syl beside him. She was pressed against his left hand as usual, her eyes half closed, making the low hum. Orit placed the sensor ring around them both and stepped back to his console. The scan ran for 6 minutes. Rin watched Orit's face. He was good at watching faces. It was something the tunnels had taught him, where the face of the lead engineer at a support structure told you more about safety than any instrument reading. Orit's face started neutral. Then, around the 3rd minute, something shifted. His eyes moved across the readout twice. Then a third time. He recalibrated one of the instruments, ran a secondary pass. By the 6th minute, he looked like a man who had been asked a question in a language he was almost certain he spoke. "The primary resonance is genuine," he said, not looking up from the console. "It is not a proximity imprint." Dravener's voice came from the alcove, flat and careful, and the secondary classification. Or it was quiet for a moment. "The frequency pattern does not match any bonding record on file. It is genuine resonance that is confirmed, but the signature type is outside the standard taxonomy." He set down the instrument in his hand. "The instruments are calibrated correctly. The result is the result." Dravener said something in verite that Rin did not catch. One of the advisors wrote it down. Elder Marin had been standing by the far wall the entire time, silent, which Rin had not noticed until she moved. She crossed to Orit's console, looked at the readout, and then went to the far shelf where the Hall of Records kept its oldest physical volumes, actual bound books, in a culture that had long since moved to data storage, which meant they were very old indeed. She found what she was looking for in less than 2 minutes. She had clearly known exactly where to look. "Wide resonance," she said, reading aloud. "A theoretical bond type recorded in the earliest verite bonding documents, considered mythological in later centuries. Occurs when a hatchling's pattern-seeking behavior encounters a companion whose emotional range is broad enough to accommodate full-spectrum resonance rather than a single frequency match." She paused. "No confirmed case in recorded verite history. Hypothesized to require a companion species with an unusually wide range of concurrent emotional states." She closed the book. The room was very quiet. Rin looked down at Syl, who had not moved during any of this, still pressed against his hand, still humming at the same steady frequency she always hummed at. "Humans," Tova said from the doorway she had followed them in, not invited, standing just inside the threshold. "We have a word for it in our psychological literature." Everyone in the room looked at her. She kept her eyes on the readout. "Humans are documented as capable of experiencing multiple contradictory emotional states simultaneously, not sequentially. At the same time, fear and determination, grief and humor, exhaustion and resolve." She paused. "No other species in the Galactic Union has been documented doing this reliably across an entire population." Orit stared at her, then he looked at Rin. Rin was not sure what his face was doing. He was thinking about the tunnel, about being 17 and afraid and going back in anyway, about the fact that both of those things had been equally true at the same time, and he had never thought that was remarkable. Lord Dravener left the room without speaking. His advisors followed. Orit sat down slowly in his chair and looked at the readout for a long time. "The statute cannot be used to break a true resonance bond," Marin said to no one in particular. "That is the law." She replaced the old book on its shelf with the careful hands of someone who had handled it before. "The evaluation continues." She walked out. Syl hummed. Rin sat with her in the scanning chamber long after everyone else had gone, his hand resting on her back, both of them quiet in the old stone smell of the room. 18 days left. He stopped worrying about the number. 2 nights before the verdict, the canyon trail smelled like rain that had not arrived yet. Rin walked the path the way he always did in the evenings, no lantern, slow pace, Syl moving beside him with her head low and her wings folded, reading the ground with her nose. She had started doing this 3 weeks ago when she decided that nighttime walks were a permanent thing and that she could be useful during them. The trail ran from the back of the nesting hall out along the ridge above the training fields, then curved down through a narrow canyon and back. 40 minutes, round trip. Rin had started the walks on the 6th night because he could not sleep, and Syl had followed him without being asked, and they had never stopped. He knew Tova followed sometimes. She was good at it, but not quite good enough for someone trained to notice small sounds in dark tunnels. Tonight he could hear her on the upper ridge, about 60 meters back. The canyon section was the narrowest part of the trail, high stone walls on both sides, one exit ahead and one behind. Rin had walked it enough times to know the echo patterns, which was why he noticed when the sound changed. There were two of them. They had come in from the far end of the canyon and were waiting where the path bent, using the darkness and the curve of the rock. He could hear their breathing. Verity had a slightly different respiratory rhythm than humans, slightly longer between inhale and exhale, and the soft sound of something that might have been a carrying harness. He stopped walking. Not from fear, exactly. More from the same calculation that had stopped him in the mine. Where is the air moving? What is the shape of what is ahead? What does standing still by me? Syl stopped the moment he did, reading his body without needing a signal. Two figures stepped around the bend. Large, in official-looking gear, carrying a document case, the kind used for transport authorizations. Salvar, the first one said, formal tone, the practiced tone of someone who had been told to seem official. We have an order for emergency relocation of the hatchling, welfare inspection, pending the verdict. From whom? Rin said. House Dravener, countersigned by the welfare office. At this hour. The welfare office works on Verity's schedule, the second one said, which was the first genuine thing either of them had said because it was delivered too quickly, without enough thinking behind it. Rin looked at Syl. She was watching the two figures with the same assessment he was using, her head low, body still, not growling yet. Her instinct was reading his instinct and finding the same thing he was finding. This is wrong, this has bad edges, do not move fast. He looked back at the two figures. I would like to read the document, he said. The first figure started to open the case. The second one shifted his weight not toward Rin, but sideways, which was the wrong direction for someone who was just waiting for a document to be produced. From the ridge above, Tova's voice came down clearly and without urgency, the way voices sound when someone is speaking loudly on purpose so that everyone hears them. This is Bond Trainer Tova, in official capacity. I am logging this location and timestamp. The individuals in the canyon are requested to identify themselves by name and certification number for the welfare record. The first figure closed the document case. The second one looked up at the ridge. Neither of them identified themselves. After a moment, the first one said quietly, another time, and they walked back the way they had come, around the bend, gone. Rin exhaled. Syl pressed against his leg. Tova came down the ridge path quickly, sliding the last section on loose stone, landing beside him with less grace than usual. She looked at the bend where the figures had disappeared, then at Rin. Are you all right? She said. Yes. Did you know they were there before they showed themselves? About 30 seconds before. She stared at him, and you kept walking. If I turned around, they would have followed. The canyon only has two ends, better to know where they were. Tova put her hands on her knees for a moment, breathing. Then she stood up straight. That was not an authorized welfare inspection, she said. The welfare office closes at the 6th hour. I know the schedule. I know, Rin said. They stood in the canyon for a moment, the unarived rain still hanging in the air, Syl quiet between them. You did not run, Tova said. It came out differently than she meant it, not as an observation, but as something closer to awe, which was an uncomfortable thing for her face to be doing. Running was not going to help Syl, Rin said simply. Tova looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Syl, who was watching her with those half-lit silver eyes that had, over the past 28 days, gone from hatchling uncertainty to something settled and clear. I am going to file a full report tonight, Tova said. What happened here will be part of the record for the verdict. Thank you, Rin said. She nodded once and turned back toward the hall. Then she stopped and said without turning around, she chose correctly. She kept walking. Rin stood in the dark canyon with Syl, 2 nights from whatever came next, and felt something settle into place in his chest. Not certainty, Not confidence. Just the simple, steady thing that happens when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Sil hummed. He put his hand on her back. They walked home. The Grand Council Hall of House Dravener had seen many verdicts. The walls were old enough to remember the first bonding records, the first Dragon Rider pairs, the long tradition that had been Varath's most sacred institution for longer than most Galactic Union species had been writing things down. Every decision made in this room carried weight. The Varatai understood weight. They built for it, in stone and ceremony, in a culture that believed the most important things should be slow. Rin sat in the observer chair, not the advocate's position, because he had no legal standing in a Varatai council, which was one of the many things nobody had fully worked out yet. Sil sat beside him. She was larger now than on the day of the ceremony. 30 days of eating and training and growing had done what 30 days does with a hatchling, and she no longer looked like something that had just arrived. She looked like something that had decided to stay. Lord Dravener was present. He had not looked at Rin once since entering the room. This was a statement, not an oversight. Commander Sova Neth sat in her council position with the stillness of someone who had already made up her mind and was waiting for the room to catch up. Tova stood near the back wall. Elder Marin sat in her traditional position at the far end of the long table, her old hands flat on the surface, her silver eyes watching everything without appearing to watch anything. There was one additional presence, a Galactic Union observer, a tall Brenaki female named Counselor Os, who had arrived that morning and sat quietly in the corner taking notes on a slim silver pad. The council opened with a formal reading of the evaluation record, Tova's training logs, Orit's bioscan results, Marin's citation of the wide resonance texts, the incident report from the canyon, filed 2 nights ago, which had opened a separate internal inquiry into 2 individuals employed by a House Dravener affiliate. That inquiry was ongoing. Lord Dravener's jaw was a hard line. When the reading finished, Sova Neth spoke first. This surprised everyone except Marin. I oppose this bond, Sova said, her voice carrying the flat, factual quality of someone filing a correction to the record rather than making an argument. I opposed it on political grounds. A human bonded to a Varatai silver dragon has no precedent in our law, in our military structure, or in our diplomatic agreements with the Galactic Union. She paused. I was thinking about the wrong problem. The room was quiet. The correct question is not whether this bond fits our existing categories, she continued. The correct question is what it does, and what it does based on 30 days of documented evidence is function. Better than most bonded pairs I have reviewed at this stage, the hatchling is stable, the rider is capable, the resonance is confirmed genuine. She looked directly at Lord Dravener. My vote is in favor of full recognition. Dravener's hands were flat on the table. This sets a precedent that cannot be undone, he said. Yes, Sova said, it does. The vote was called. 3 in favor, including Sova and Marin, 1 abstention. Lord Dravener did not vote against. He simply marked his position as absent from the record, which was its own kind of statement, but not one that changed the outcome. The bond was formally recognized. Counselor Os stopped writing, looked up, and said quietly, The Union will want to discuss the wide resonance finding. When you are ready. She looked at Rin directly for the first time. There are others who will want to understand what this means for human-alien bonding research. Rin nodded once. He was not sure what that meant yet, but he understood it was large. Marin came to him afterward, while the council hall was emptying, and Sil was investigating the carved stone reliefs along the lower wall with great interest. You have a choice, Marin said. Return to your human unit as a liaison rider, the first bonded human in Varatai history with all the attention that brings, or remain here as part of a joint program Sova has proposed, training, research, building something that does not yet have a name. Rin looked at Sil, who had found a carving she liked and was pressing her nose against it. What does Sil think? Marin's expression did something it rarely did. It warmed. Ask her. Rin crossed the room and crouched beside Syl, who pulled her nose away from the carving and looked at him with those silver eyes that had been watching him since the day she cracked her shell. He did not say anything. He just looked at her, the way he had learned to over 30 days of walks and training and standing still in dark places together. Syl pressed her head against his chest, directly over where his heart was, and made the low, steady hum. Tova, still standing near the back wall, translated without being asked. "She says you already know." He did. Outside, the sky over Vareth was open and clear, the kind of clear that comes after a long tension finally breaks. Rin and Syl walked out of the Grand Council Hall into it together. No training, no timers, no 30-day clocks, just the wide field and the wind off the ridge and a silver dragon who had grown large enough that when she spread her wings, they cast a real shadow. She looked at him. He put his hand on her neck. They ran. She lifted, he held on. And the first human Veritae bonded pair rose into the sky above Vareth like something the old records had always been waiting to write down. If only someone had thought to go back in when they heard a voice calling from the dark.